Hello everyone, and today we're going to be reviewing the PlayStation 5 because we've had it just over a month now, and it's time to give you my opinion on the PlayStation 5 review. We'll break this down into a few sections. We'll cover some of the good points, we'll cover the bad points, and then we'll give you a conclusion, and we'll also look at it from a sort of PC gamer's perspective and answer the question, if you own a mid-range PC, is it worth upgrading to? So let's start with the good points. We're not really going to cover the PS5 hardware in too much detail. We are going to just go over it in sort of my experience of using it because there's so many hardware reviews out there that there's no point in doing one of them. So let's start with the sort of user experience. And one of the best things is the solid state hard drive, the SSD, of course. It is great. Load times for the operating system are significantly faster than the previous generation. I owned base PS4 for comparison and an Xbox One X. The Xbox One X was glacial in its time to load. It took forever. The PS5 loads boot times around 15 seconds, which is quite nice, and load times for games are excellent. In particular, Demon Souls and Spider-Man Miles Morales have around about 15-second load times. They're pretty good. Demon Souls is particularly good because you do go back and forth between like the hub world, the Nexus, and the sort of various different zones of the game, and the load time is very nice. It just does a little fog effect that goes away. The screen goes black, little fog effect, and then it goes back up. Takes around 10 to 15 seconds, not too bad at all. Spider-Man Miles Morales, interestingly enough, you can go from cold boot, that's powering on the console, to loading up Spider-Man Miles Morales and getting in game in under 1 minute, which I think is quite impressive there. That's nice. That's so loading the OS, loading the game, and into gameplay in under a minute. So that is pretty, it's pretty impressive, the load times from the SSD. It doesn't transform game performance as some people claim, but it does get you into the game faster, and it doesn't eliminate loading times, but it makes them quite tolerable. It's not going to go back to the sort of Nintendo 64 days, where we had no loading screens at all, or very minimalistic loading screens. But I think it's because there's just so much data to load in today's modern games that even though, yes, the SSD is technically faster than the N64's, the cartridges, but there's so much more data to load, so that's why you still get loading screens. Another good point is 60 FPS. It seems to be the standard. Most games at least have the option to run at 60 FPS, most of the next gen games. Some even support 120 hertz modes. And again, most games at least have the option. They have performance or graphics modes. Demon Souls, for example, you can have the high fidelity mode, which is 4K and 30 FPS with higher graphics settings, which looks great, but you can also have the preferred option, which is the 1440p 60 FPS mode. Again, you'd rather have the 60 FPS in a game like Demon Souls. It does test your reaction times there, so you'd rather have the higher frame rate. Spider-Man Miles Morales again has a 4K 30 mode, which has ray tracing. It also has 4K 60 with no ray tracing and slightly lower graphics settings. They also recently added in a 60 FPS 1080p ray tracing mode, so that's good. It's good to have those options. If you want the graphical feature set, if you want the ray tracing, you want the sort of higher quality sort of assets, higher quality graphics settings, you can do that, but you have to have 30 FPS. If you want the 60 FPS option, it's nice again to have that, just lowering the graphics quality and obviously disabling the ray tracing. And then those who want the ray tracing and the performance there, they do have the option, but it is 1080p though. 1080p, 1080-60 with ray tracing on there. So it covers all the bases, and I know a lot of people asked for it when Spider-Man Miles Morales came out. Can we have a 1080p 60 with ray tracing? And I'm glad Insomniac listened to them. That's good. Good to have the option. Use the 4K 30 mode for photo mode, so you can take photos, and use the performance mode for playing the game, and ray tracing, if you want it or not, is there. And again, the games that support 120 hertz modes, you've got games like Devil May Cry 5, Dirt 5, Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War, and Borderlands 3. I think that's the games off the top of my head that I can remember. I've tested Borderlands 3. Now, Borderlands 3 has a PS5 port. It is just the PS4 Pro version that's been ported over to the PS5. Again, it has two options. It has resolution mode, which runs at 4K and 60 FPS, so that's nice because resolution mode on the PS4 Pro and Xbox One X were like 1800p and they targeted 60 FPS, but very rarely did they hit 60 FPS. Although this resolution mode is 60 FPS at 4K, and it runs fine, and it sticks to its 60 FPS target most of the time. The other option is performance mode, and the performance mode runs at 1080p and it targets 120 FPS. I did test this out on my. I do have a 1440p 144 hertz monitor, so I could test out Borderlands 3 at the 120 hertz mode. It is pretty good actually. You don't really notice it doesn't. It's not locked 120 hertz, but it dropping below 60, when it drops below 120, it's less noticeable. It does drop maybe 10 to 20 FPS, and it's not as noticeable, so it is there if you want the option. And again, a game like Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War is a competitive shooter, so it is a competitive advantage there to have the 100. I think it's like 1200p it runs at in the 120 hertz mode. But yeah, you've got that as an option there. Certainly for multiplayer, you would want the 120 hertz mode. Maybe go for like the 4K 60 mode. I think it doesn't quite hit 4K. I don't know because I don't own Black Ops Cold War on the PS5, so I can't really say anything about that. But that is good. That is a really good thing that we've got again the option to go to higher than 60 FPS. Not sure how many people with TVs are going to have TVs that support 120 hertz, but it's nice to have the option if you've got a monitor on PC. So that's quite nice. The other big plus is backwards compatibility. It doesn't support as many games as Xbox Series X, because Xbox Series X will run any original Xbox or Xbox 360 game that is compatible with Xbox One. It'll be compatible on Series X as well. So it doesn't quite have that. It only runs PS4 games. It does run the majority of PS4 games. It will run them with the PS4 Pro enhanced settings. I never owned a PS4 Pro, so it is nice to get that enhancement. So games with dynamic resolution scaling will generally hit the top end of the scale, whatever that is, whether it's 1800p or 4K. Some games were like dynamic resolution scaling where it would target 4K. The good news is on PS5, without any patching, they will hit the top end of that, so they'll hit native 4K. Games that have unlocked frame rates will run at 60 FPS for most of the time. So games like Final Fantasy 15 was one I tried. That had an unlocked frame rate on the PS4 Pro. Shadow of the Tomb Raider. I was gonna say, Shadow or Rise, and Rise of the Tomb Raider as well. I think they both had it. Shadow of the Tomb Raider was another game. They tended to run between 40 and 50 FPS on the PS4 Pro, whereas on the PS5 they tend to be locked 60. So that's good news if you're playing those games. Two of the games that I played there, Tomb Raider and Final Fantasy 15 there. So that's pretty good. And some games, some of the Sony first party games have had patches. So Ghost of Tsushima and Days Gone have received a PS5 patch, and they run at 4K 60, which is nice there. Ghost of Tsushima in particular is a particularly beautiful game. Like, I really love it. I never played it on PS4. I didn't buy it at the time, but I'm glad I bought it in the Black Friday sale, because it is one of my favourite games of the year, and I think the majority of the gameplay footage for this video will be Ghost of Tsushima, because, again, that's my most played game on the PS5. It's a really good game, really cool. It's really the game that Assassin's Creed wished it was, really. That's the game that Ubisoft wished they could make Assassin's Creed. I feel like it's the game that Assassin's Creed should have been from the start. You know, because it really makes you feel like a badass samurai, and I do love that. The fact that it runs at 60 FPS makes a massive difference. All right, let's go and talk about the bads then of the PS5, and we'll start with the stand for the PS5. Now the stand is quite flimsy when the console is sitting horizontally. When it's sitting vertically, you put a screw in it and it's fine and it works fine. But I don't have enough space in my entertainment cabinet for it to sit vertically, so it has to sit horizontally. It has got two little clips that you put on, and I have put them on correctly. I looked at the instruction menu, the manual, sorry. It says you line them up. It's got like the PlayStation button logos, and you line them up with the two square buttons on the back of the PS5, and then you clip it in. I've clipped it in there. Every time you sometimes if you put a disc in too fast, or even inserting or removing a USB cable can cause it to fall off the stand, which is quite annoying, really. It's a minor inconvenience, but it is something that I've noticed that is there. The other big thing is, despite having the ultra-fast SSD, is the hard drive capacity. You only get 667 gigabytes of usable space. There's no option currently for expansion. There is an NVMe slot on in the internals of the PS5. You have to take one of the covers off of it, but it's not activated yet, and there are no compatible drives on the market at the moment. That will be added in a firmware update. So you are limited for PS5 games to the 667 gigabytes. There is another option for PS4 games. You can use an external hard drive. In fact, you can take your external hard drive. If you had a PS4 external hard drive, you can literally plug it in directly to the PS5 and it will work and it will recognize all of your games, which is nice. The only disadvantage of this is, of course, if you're using a mechanical external hard drive, you don't get the benefit of added load time. The load times are just as they were on the PS4, so you don't get that. You'd have to transfer it across to the PS5's hard drive to get the enhanced loading speeds there. So that is a slight disadvantage. I mean, I bought a terabyte external hard drive for the PS4 games. We're just gonna have to put up with the long load times for most of them, but again, it's not really a huge issue for me. You also can't just move a PS5 game over to the external drive, even just for archiving purposes. I mean, I understand that you shouldn't be able to play it from an external hard drive because PS5 games are coded specifically with that SSD in mind. So running it on a slower drive would cause massive issues there. But even if you just move it across just to archive it, so to save you installing it again, because it'd be much quicker just to transfer it rather than download it again, especially if you bought it digitally. I think that would be a nice option to have there. The other thing I don't like is the resolution support for it. We talked about the support for like 120 hertz modes, and that's a good thing, but the console only supports 16:9 resolutions, and it only supports three resolutions: 720p, 1080p, and 4K. There's no option for 1440p support. Again, I have a 1440p monitor, and I tried this, and it basically gave me the option for 720p or 1440p. So a bit of a shame there, because again, people who own PC monitors, especially high refresh rate PC monitors, a lot of us own the 1440p monitors there. So if they wanted to do that, that would be nice to have added in native 1440p support. Most games tend to run under that anyway, running at 120 hertz, but it's nice to just have that option there. There's also no option for ultra wide support. If you're a PC player and you've got an ultra wide monitor, it will only run at 16:9, so it won't do like 3840 by 1440 or anything like that. It won't do any of those resolutions. It's very restrictive in those resolutions, so to me that is a negative point against it. I would like to have the option. Having more options is never a bad thing, really. The other thing that it lacks is it lacks any support for variable refresh rates, no FreeSync support, which is surprising considering it has an AMD GPU in there. It's got, you know, a big Navi GPU in there, and it doesn't support variable refresh rate. The Xbox Series X does. So again, I have a FreeSync PC monitor. Helps in those games, especially those 120 hertz games where it can't quite hit 120 FPS. You then don't notice the juddering from the frame rate drops. Not that you really notice it then, But variable refresh rate would be nice to support it there. I don't know why, because again, it's got an AMD GPU in there, and my monitor is FreeSync compatible, so it doesn't support that, which would have been a nice touch there. Again, especially games that don't quite hit their frame rate targets would be quite nice for them. So I suppose the question that we're going to answer is, if you own a PC, if you own a mid-range PC, should you upgrade your PC, or should you buy a PlayStation 5? Now this is an interesting answer here. If all you're concerned about is game performance, then yes, the PS5 is an upgrade. It is certainly an upgrade. So if you own a GTX 1060 and a quad core CPU, yes, you will feel the benefits of the PS5 because it is quite a nice little upgrade there. However, it is still a console, and we have talked about the limitations of a console again with the resolution limitation, the 16:9 monitor support, the lack of variable refresh rate. Game prices are also ridiculously expensive for next gen, and you also have to pay for PlayStation Plus, again, as a requirement if you want to play games online. So those are all things to consider. But purely from a game performance standpoint, yes, technically it is an upgrade. But yeah, the PC is still the place to go. It's not going to replace your PC anytime soon with a PS5. I think I would go the option of upgrading the PC, especially if you can ever get. I mean, you can't. It is a struggle to get a hold of a PS5. It's a struggle to get a hold of next generation GPUs as well. So you're kind of between a rock and a hard place there if you want to upgrade now, because getting like an RTX 3060 Ti, it's very difficult to get a hold of one these days, or even a 3070. Again, they'll outperform the PS5. You're probably going to have to upgrade your CPU as well if you've got a quad-core CPU. Probably, if you look at the new Ryzen 5000 series, they look really good, by the way. But yeah, again, availability of the PS5 is, and again, the PS5 is a good value proposition though. For £450 or $500, it's not a bad value proposition. You really can't build a PC that will match those specs for the same price. You really just can't do that at the moment. You will be able to do so over time, obviously, as PC hardware gets cheaper and newer hardware comes out. But for now, the console's not a bad value proposition there in terms of it. So I think if you bought a PS5, you would be satisfied with it. I'm quite satisfied with it. Does have a few limitations there, but overall it is satisfactory. Again, if you're coming from a PC, it is still a console. You are still going to have the restrictions of the console. So there is that to consider, a bit less freedom, but value-wise, it's not too bad there. So there is plus points for it there. But anyway, that is all for this video, and thank you for joining me, and we'll see you again soon, and goodbye.